Hey guys, before tonight's journey begins, take some time to settle in. Find a position that lets your body relax. Release any tension you might be holding on to. Let your shoulders fall naturally and set down the burden you have carried all day. Tonight, we will spend a quiet day in a feudal manor in northern France, from the cold before dawn until the last candle goes out deep into the night. Here, there is nothing you need to rush after. The story will follow the rhythm of breathing, aiming to gently guide you into sleep. If these peaceful journeys help you rest, we warmly invite you to follow this channel so you can return to evenings like this whenever you need. A quiet thumbs up or a few words below about where you are listening tonight can help more people discover these stories. There is no rush to do any of this. You can wait until tomorrow morning or never do it at all. For now, nothing is being asked of you. Right now, the warmth around you, the night quietly settling, and a long, gentle story are waiting to begin. If your eyes want to close, let them close. Let your breathing slow down. When you are ready, we will step into a dark and silent hall at the tail end of night, just before the fire is kindled. The place we are going to tonight is in northern France, in a century so distant that the exact year no longer matters. It is around the middle of the 12th century, a time when the cold came early and stayed long. It is the deep autumn there now. In the slow and grey days, people call the weeks before Martinmas Eve. The light is growing thin, and the first hard frost has fallen on the fields. This house is a manor built from grey stone, hidden behind walls and a moat, with a tower standing at one corner and a hall at the centre. I want to take you inside to spend the day. While we stay there, I want you to closely follow one person. She is the lady of this manor. Her name is Alice, and tonight you and I will do nothing but follow her from the dark moments before she wakes until she watches the last candle go out. We will not rush her. We will only stand quietly to the side so we do not block her way, watching her move through the rooms she controls tonight. No troubles wait for her, and nothing requires you to stay tense or alert. Only her day and the calm work that fills it. It is easy to imagine the lady of a castle as someone who sits still and is waited on by others, but her daily reality is much gentler and busier than that. She knows how to bake bread, how to spin wool into thread, and how to salt meat so a large household can eat during long winter months when nothing grows. She keeps the hall warm, the storeroom stocked, and manages the many women working around the house. None of this happens with fuss. Everything moves slowly. By the end of this day, you may find that, almost without realizing it, you have gained an understanding of what it means to support a small world with your own hands. Imagine, even for a moment, that this day is yours. You are the one who wakes earlier than anyone else in the cold rooms, feeling the chill of the stone floor through the rushes covering it, knowing well that the fire will not light itself. If that is so, you might begin to understand why a woman like this counts her candles, salting her meat, and teaching the young girls in her care to spin thread. Not because anyone told her to do it, but because this whole day, this house, quietly and endlessly depends on her. She learned long ago how to shoulder that weight without making a sound. Now, let us go to her. The hall is still dark. The fire from last night is settled under a soft, grey blanket of ashes, with a few embers still glowing. Narrow windows hold only the last shadows of night. Somewhere, a door remains unopened, and the cold still lurks in the corners. We will step inside quietly, before anyone else wakes, and watch the first warmth of the day being gently cooled back to life. The hall is the first place we come to, and at this moment, it is almost completely wrapped in darkness. Outside, the night still rules the land. Inside these thick stone walls, it is even more unyielding. The spacious room stretches into the shadows, longer than you might guess from the doorway, with a high ceiling lost somewhere in the darkness above us. In the exact center of the floor, a row of heavy pillars rises up to support wooden beams, and between them, the air is cold and still, faintly carrying the sweet scent of old smoke. Apart from the soft sounds of the sleeping house, there is no other noise. A piece of wood creaking under pressure, the wind searching along the walls, and somewhere outside the door, the slow drip of water. If you stand here for a while and let your eyes catch the faintest light, you begin to make out the room itself. Near the center of the floor, resting on a few slightly raised, flat stones, is the fireplace. Now it is just a wide bed of ashes, soft and greyish white, but beneath that ash, some coals still live on. They have kept alive all through the night. Before the whole house drifted to sleep, someone tended them, gathering the embers and covering them up so that the warmth would last until morning, just like a household would carefully keep something they cannot afford to lose. Tonight, we watch the small flame kept alive for us, and the pair of hands soon to awaken it, because everything else in this house starts there. You can feel the cold. It passes through the floor, climbs up through the dried rushes strewn across the stone, and settles in corners of the room where light never fully reaches. The windows are narrow and set deep into the stone without glass. In those times, only the wealthiest homes could afford glass, and only in their best rooms. The window niches are shut tight with wooden shutters against the night, but the cold still seeps through the gaps in the wood, layering over the rushes, benches, and long table like a second floor of chill. It is a cold that does not harm, but waits patiently. You hug yourself against it, and you wait too. A girl quietly steps into the darkness, moving with the soft footing learned by servants in a sleeping house. She is one of the household's young maids, barefoot on the rushes, holding a small clay lamp carefully cupped in one hand to shield its tiny flame from going out. We stand aside to let her pass. She does not hurry or need light to find the fireplace. Every morning during her work, she comes here in the dark, her feet knowing their path across the floor without guidance. She kneels by the edge of the warm ashes. She places the lamp beside her. With a care almost like tenderness, she begins waking the sleeping embers. It is slow and patient work. She does not poke at the coals or rush them. With a small iron rod, she gently moves aside the grey ash to reveal the deep red core waiting all night long. She leans close and breathes gently on it, at first just that. One long, soft breath, then another, until the red glows brighter and a thin wisp of smoke rises. Then she begins feeding it. Small dry sticks first, then thin twigs, laying them across the red glow as carefully as you would put down a delicate object. The first small flame rises up, blue at the base and yellow at the tip. The girl sits back on her heels, watching the flame just like anyone would watch a fire they have just brought to life, with a quiet satisfaction that needs no words. I have always thought there is something here worth slowing down for. We turn keys or flip switches, and warmth comes easily, and we take it for granted. For her, this morning, not a bit of warmth in this whole house exists, except by her breath and patience. This fire is not something she owns, it is something she tends, and that is a difference. She knows that if one night she were careless with the covered coals, this house would wake cold and sparked only by flint, needing a long, hard struggle before it could be warmed again. so she never takes it lightly. This small, everyday, unhurried care is the very first thing to happen in this house, before the lady wakes, before the bells ring, before any other part of this long day begins. As the flames grow, they begin to reveal the room's shape back to us. The smoke climbs straight up into the darkness, and if you follow it with your eyes, you find far above the reason why this hall was built so high. The roof has an opening, a square gap between the timbers called a skylight, left there for this very purpose. The smoke gathers under the high ceiling, then rises up through the gap into the night sky, keeping the room below clear enough to live in. There is no chimney here, or nothing worth mentioning. Chimneys are an extravagance for smaller, newer rooms, while the hall uses the hole in the roof like halls have done for ages. On calm mornings, the smoke rises clean and straight. On windy days, swirls of soft mist fill the hall, stinging the throat a little, and so everyone learns to live closer to the floor. In the firelight, this long room slowly reveals its outline. You can now see the table, a huge rough wooden board stretching down the hall's length, with benches and stools beside it where the men of the household sit to eat. At the far end is a low platform they call the high table, set a bit above the rest of the floor, where the master and mistress sit and receive honoured guests. On the walls hang the usual things: weapons kept out of the way up high, outlines of a few pieces of armour whose dull metal glints when firelight moves across them, and thick hanging fabrics everywhere. Tapestries set against the bitter cold that creeps along the stone walls. Where the firelight touches the pillars, you can make out wood carvings, leaves, knots, and faces blurred by years of smoke. The rushes underfoot are the only floor covering, telling small stories of the season. There are no carpets here. Carpets belong in palaces and will not enter common homes for a long time still. Instead, the stone is thickly strewn with dried rushes and straw, swept together to keep out the cold and replaced when they get worn. In better seasons, the household might have scattered fresh green branches cut from the woods across them, filling the hall for a day or two with the scent of crushed leaves and sap. One tale says a great lord came back on a hot day to find his room strewn with greenery and was pleased, calling it refreshing. But that is not the season now. It is the end of the year. The green has faded from the woods, and the rushes at our feet are plain and dry, just enough to protect bare feet from the cold stone slabs. Now the fire is no longer a single flame, but a low, steady blaze, its light reaching far enough to hint at the size of the house around this one room. The hall is the heart of this place, but only the heart. Outside the door is a courtyard, an open yard surrounded by walls, around which the rest of the household's buildings cluster tightly. The kitchen and pantry, the office, where the long work of feeding so many is managed, the stables for the horses, and low buildings where animals and people could both be enclosed when the gates must close. Estates like this were designed with two purposes at once. It is a home, full of family and servants, and the sense of bread and smoke. It is also a fortress, built to tighten like a fist in hard times, keeping all inside, fed and safe. On a quiet autumn morning, the second purpose sleeps, while only the first has woken. Nearby, just off the hall, are the small rooms where many servants sleep. They are little more than stone closets, simple and cramped, hardly comfortable. Not everyone sleeping here has a proper bed. A servant might rest on a low bunk built against the wall, or on a straw mat spread on the floor, wrapped in whatever coverings belong to them. In these narrow rooms, other early risers begin moving, their work starting with the first light of dawn. The faint sounds of a house waking join the soft crackle of the fire bit by bit. A door opens. The sound of a bucket being put down somewhere, bare feet moving across cold stone slabs. Just as the fire gradually gains strength, very faint sounds begin in the rooms above and around the hall. At the back of the hall is a low door leading to a smaller room, the mistress's own chamber, separated from public spaces, so she and the master can have some privacy. By later standards, it is not a grand room. The furniture is plain and heavy and scarce. A bed, one or two chests, and a tapestry on the wall, softening the stone. But it belongs to her, and it is warmer than the hall. And this very morning, the lady of the estate is waking right here. Her name is Alice. She is dressed in a linen undergarment, sleeping beneath heavy wool blankets and furs. Anyone who can keep warm sleeps like this. The first thing she realizes this morning is the biting cold outside the bed and the darkness still in the room. For a moment, she does not move. She lies listening just as we have been listening to the faint sounds the house makes. Somewhere within them, very faintly, she can hear the hall fire already awakened, because a house with a living fire sounds different from one without. Only when she hears that does she throw back the covers and slowly get up into the cold. No one comes to dress her at this hour, nor would she wait for anyone. She dresses herself quickly and briskly, like something done 1,000 times before. First, a linen shift, close to the skin. Then, an outer robe made of good plain wool, in deep earth or dead leaf colours, tied tightly on each side to lock in warmth. Then, a second layer for the cold morning, because the hall will stay chilly for hours, and only a fool would dress for the fire instead of the room. She pulls on wool stockings and ties them off. She finds her shoes in the dark. Finally, she takes a fine white cloth to bind her hair and cover it, as married women of her class do before meeting others. She twists and tucks the linen with her fingers, needing no mirror to guide her. I want to tell you a small thing about that headcloth, easy to miss. Wearing it is not about vanity, nor entirely about modesty, or at least not just modesty. It is a kind of uniform. A woman's covered head shows at a glance who she is. Married, settled, the mistress of the house, not a girl of the household. When Alice wraps that linen around her head in the dark before anyone sees her, she is not dressing herself up for the day. She is putting on her position like a man picking up his tools for work. From that moment, she is no longer a woman roused by cold in a dark room. She is the lady of the estate, and the house waits for her. Before leaving, she stands at her room's narrow window, seated in a deep stone recess built into the thick wall. The shutters are closed tight against the night, but she pushes them open just a crack, and cold rushes in clean and sharp, smelling of frost and snow. Still, she can see nothing. Below the yard is a well of darkness, and the sky above is just a shade lighter. Far beyond the wall, the fields lie pale and stiff under the season's first hard frost. This morning scene means winter is no longer coming. It has arrived. She knows what that means for a household. Months of short days and long nights, eating stored foods before supplies run out, making what cannot be bought, keeping warmth, order, and enough supplies through this long, lean darkness. She closes the shutters, locking out the cold. She is ready to begin her day, planning to start well. She is ready now, almost. The room remains dim, but through the door she can see the fireplace casting its faint, flickering light against the wall, glowing golden in the gloom. She senses the change in the air as warmth begins to spread. Somewhere outside the wall, faint but clear on the cold wind, the bell tolls. It is the bell for the first hour's prayer, the first hour of the day, rung from the little chapel, calling the estate's people to pray and telling all who hear that the night is over and the morning has officially begun. Alice stands for a moment, listening to the bell. Then she lifts the door latch, the warmth of the hall rushing to meet her as she steps out of her quiet room and into the long hall where the fire burns bright, a new day hers to meet and take on. In this house, there is one room that is warmer and quieter than anywhere else, and this is where we will spend long, leisurely mornings. It is located at the back of the hall, hidden behind a separate door, and it is the lady of the house's peaceful, private room. The word sounds gentle, and this room lives up to that. Compared to the spacious, chilly air of the hall, this room feels small, with a low ceiling and a private atmosphere. It is a cozy sanctuary to pass time when bored. Light filters through a narrow, deep window, casting a dim glow. The walls are covered with tapestries rather than bare stone, so no matter where you look, your eyes meet the soft colours of old wool instead of cold stone. Take some time to look at these wall hangings, because they are worth seeing. They are tapestries woven in dark red, dark green, and muted gold, with time and smoke softening their colours. They show common patterns for this kind of fabric: leaves and twisting branches, a hunting dog, a bird, and a lady beneath a garden tree. These tapestries are not just for show. They hang there like a second woolen wall in front of the stone, keeping warmth inside and blocking drafts from the door, making the room warmer. The hall's walls are decorated with weapons and armour, but this room has none of those. Instead, where other rooms might hang swords, here hang a few musical instruments. A small harp you could hold on your lap, a curved viol nearby, and a round-bodied stringed toy that people of that era might have called by names we have mostly forgotten. They sit quietly, waiting for someone to have time to play. Morning time is not yet for music. Mornings belong to work, and plans for labour are set and waiting. Near the window, where the light is best, there are several baskets filled with wool. This is not the kind of smooth finished cloth you might expect in a lady's room, but wool in a rougher, earlier state. There is a pile of greasy, grey-white, raw wool freshly sheared from sheep. Next to it some washed wool. Beside that, some that has been combed soft and ready. This is where cloth begins, long before it becomes fabric, and the lady of this house knows every step of the long journey from wool to cloth. This morning, like most mornings, she sits surrounded by female servants, taking a few steps further along that path. Her name is Alice, and she has habits built up over many years. She calmly sits on a low stool by the window. Two others are with her. The first is Marlowe, her personal maid, older than her mistress, with quick, thin hands and a face that seems to have spent a lifetime doing this kind of work. She has served the lady for so long, they could sit together all morning, exchange fewer than a dozen words, and still not miss a thing. The second is much younger, about 12 years old, with hair not yet covered and hands still clumsy. Her name is Constance. She is not a servant, but the daughter of another noble family. By custom, she has been sent here to be raised and taught under the watch of a noblewoman. This morning, like every morning, she is learning here. Their first task is wool combing, the heaviest of the morning chores. Marlotte picks up a pair of flat wooden combs with rows of small iron teeth, places a greasy ball of wool on one, then brushes it straight again and again with the other, untangling the knots. It is pure arm and shoulder work, accompanied by a smell of natural lanolin warmth from the wool, not unpleasant, just strong and heavy in this small room. Under her hands, tangled wool loosens and lightens into soft, even clouds of fibres, all aligned in the same direction. ready to be drawn into thread. Constance has her own smaller wooden combs and combs slowly with a frown, often tangling the wool into a mess. Marlotte silently reaches out now and then to fix her work. All this wool has its season, and this season is now. The estate keeps its own flock, and in the warm early summer the sheep are sheared, their wool stored. Now, with the year coming to a close and cold forcing the family indoors, that wool is brought out to be worked during the long dark months when the fields are almost impossible to work. Winter is the spinning season. When snow falls, a family turns inside, and the wool that grew on sheep in spring slowly becomes cloth through one morning after another, all through winter, ready to warm those same backs the next year. Not all wool keeps the raw grey-brown colour. Some of the wool in baskets has been dyed. The colours themselves are small miracles. Soft red comes from the root of a plant, yellow from some flowers and leaves, blue from a crushed, soaked, and processed herb that shows no colour until the fabric meets air. These are the colours of wall tapestries and fine clothes, patiently extracted bit by bit from fields and woods by women who know which plants dye which colours. This knowledge passes from mother to daughter, living here in this room in Alice's mind as naturally and surely as the spinning wheel turns. Wool is one path to thread, but not the only one. Another fibre is worked here, cheaper and rougher to prepare. Flax, made into linen cloth. Alice's undergarment this morning is linen fine, cool and pale, but it began as a tall green stalk, looking just like any ordinary weed. Extracting thread from flax is a long, patient process that mostly happens far from this warm room. Harvested stalks must soak until the woody shell loosens from the inner fibres. Then they must dry, break, beat, and be pulled over an iron-toothed bed to comb out short bits until only a long, pale fibre remains, soft like horsehair and tough like rope. Only after this can it be spun on spindles like wool. The women here know this whole process well, from fieldwork to soaking to breaking, just as well as they know spinning. Their linen, like their wool, comes from their own hands. When enough combed wool has gathered, spinning begins, and the room settles into a quiet rhythm that will last most of the morning. Alice picks up a spinning wheel, a long rod with the soft, cloud-like wool, loosely wrapped at one end. She tucks it under her left arm, so the wool is supported and ready to reach. Her right hand holds the spindle, a slender turned wooden stick with a round haul made of stone or clay near the bottom, designed to spin steadily and for a long time. She draws a few fibres from the wool on the spindle with her fingers, twirls them into a thread tail, attaches it to the spindle, then with practiced thumb and forefinger twitches the spindle to spin and lets it hang. This is the core step, worth watching carefully because it looks small but forms the foundation of every garment in this house. The spindle hangs spinning, spinning while hanging, twisting loose fibres into yarn. Meanwhile, Alice feeds wool steadily from the rod with her other hand, letting just the right amount loosen here or tighten there so the thread is even, strong, and unbroken. When the spindle nears the floor, she stops it, winds the new yarn onto its shaft, and starts again, over and over. Once learned, this nearly automatic handwork frees the mind to wander or rest. A woman can spin for hours, walking about, chatting, watching children. Her fingers never stop, and her focus is light. I find I cannot skip this lightly. The spinning wheel holds a whole vanished world inside. Think of the things tied to it. Alice's undergarment this morning, the robe worn over it, the wall tapestries, even the quilt on her bed, all begin with a woman holding a spinning wheel and a weighted stick, drawing endless thread from a mass of wool, one arm's length at a time. There is no other way to get thread. There are no shops to buy it, no machines to make it faster. If you want cloth, someone must spin and spin again day after day through several seasons. Wherever women gather by fires, on benches, summer doorways, somewhere among them a spindle almost always spins. The work never ends, and that is not a sadness. It is simply the way life is. Constance has her own spindle, and she is learning. It is not going well, at least not yet. She spins too fast, making the spindle jump and tangle thread. She feeds wool too fast, making thick clumps, or too slow, making thin broken thread, sending the spindle crashing down. Each time she sighs softly, picks up the thread and tries again. Alice does not scold her. She leans over, takes the girl's hand in hers, and demonstrates once more. So much wool, no more. Pull it down like this. Spin the spindle like this. Then gently let go without throwing it. This lesson is mostly about patience, and they both know it. The lady of a great household is expected to do all this well, and girls sent to such a family learn it here beside a noblewoman, in a warm winter room, just as their mothers did. There are things here worth pausing on that might seem strange to us now. Constance is not a guest. She was sent away from her parents to live for years in another family's house, raised by a woman not of her blood. No one then found this strange or unkind. This was how well-born children grew up. A girl learned to manage a household by living inside one not her own, observed and guided by its lady. She learned manners, music, needlework, spinning, weaving, and managing stores, for one day she would be the lady of such affairs herself. In doing so, she built lifelong ties between these two families. Seen from our viewpoint, it might seem harsh, a small child handed over like this, but to them it was education and honour, and Constance, frowning at her crooked thread by the window, was less lost or lonely than slowly being shaped into the woman she would grow to be. Constance has much more to learn than the rough thread on her spindle. As her fingers grow steadier, she will work finer things and learn a bright, tiny art of the needle, embroidery. On collars, cuffs, or altarcloth edges, flowers, beasts, and winding vines will be stitched with coloured silk thread, sometimes with gold thread, slow and demanding work that only patient, well-taught hands can do well. She will learn how a banquet table is set, how to greet an important guest, proper conduct, conversation, and when to stay silent, all the unspoken rules about running a great household and how a lady fits within it. None of this is written in books she can read. It is learned here through watching, practicing, and being gently corrected hundreds of times through long years of training until one day, in her own house, it flows naturally without thought. In the corner stands a loom taller than a person. All the spun thread eventually comes here. It is a huge upright wooden frame with fine warp threads stretched taut from top to bottom, weighted at the ends to keep them straight. Over time, other threads pass crosswise over these warps, up and down, layer by layer, tightly pressed until a length of cloth grows slowly from the top downward. A length of plain woolen cloth about an arm's depth now hangs there, even and dense, the colour matching the wool spun for it. It has taken many days to weave so long, and will take many more to finish. When Alice passes, she runs her hand along it, feeling the texture. Watching her, you see she searches it like reading pages of a book, finding no flaws at all. When a length of cloth is finally finished and cut from the loom, its journey is not over. It must be washed, kneaded, and pressed to full it, making its fibers tight, soft, and weather-resistant. Then it must be measured, cut, and sewn by those same hands into the garments worn by this family: robes, undergarments, hose, bed quilts, and even wall tapestries. From sheep on the hillside to the lady's robe, every step passes through the hands of the women in a room like this at some point. It is a long thread to follow from start to finish, and they know every inch of it. By now, the baskets grow lighter, and spindles full of new yarn grow heavier, while the dim light outside climbs higher and brighter. Work can go on. Work can always go on. Here a custom remains. When the last moments of morning soften, Alice will take the small harp down from the wall. She rests it on her shoulder, finds the strings with her fingers, and begins to play not a performance, but a slow, simple tune, without a set ending. The music of a great household is not just for passing minstrels. A lady is expected to play a little music that belongs to her, both playing and singing. Constance will learn this here too, just like everything else. Marlotte keeps spinning thread. Constance puts down her tangled thread and listens attentively. Notes fall one by one in the warm, compact room, steady and unhurried like yarn dropping from the spindle. Outside the deep window, grey-white clouds drift quietly. Morning work is done, and the fruits of labour lie quietly in the baskets at their feet. There is a place in this house that we have not yet visited. It is cooler and darker than anywhere else, a quiet spot where the day's many worries come to rest. This is the storage room. You walk down several worn steps to go below the level of the main hall, entering a room with thick walls and small holes high up that let air in, but hardly any light. The cold here is not the biting chill of the morning hall. It is a steady, even cold, deliberately maintained, a cold unique to a place built for storing goods and keeping them from spoiling. As you descend, the air carries a mixed scent: salt, smoke, the dusty dryness of cured grain, and beneath it all, a faint sour note from the old wood that has held food through many seasons. Your eyes slowly adjust to the dimness, and you begin to make out just how much is stored here. Wooden barrels line the walls in neat rows. Some are open, but most are sealed with lids. There are earthenware jars, wide-mouthed bottles, and burlap sacks filled with grain stacked off the ground. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the beams, and shelves hold large, pale wheels of cheese, aging quietly. This room and those behind it are, in some sense, the true heart of the house, not the warm bedrooms, because everything here answers a harsh question that looms over every household in this season. What do we eat when nothing grows? It is now late autumn, the days growing shorter, and the whole countryside is focused on the same task. This is the season marked by St. T. Martin's Day, falling in the gloomy mid-November, a time of slaughter. The Lord cannot feed all his livestock through the winter. Once the grass dies off, there is almost no forage left. Root vegetables that might feed animals through winter are barely grown at this time, and the potato, which would one day change everything, was still centuries away from being known in that corner of the world. A household keeps only enough breeding stock to last until spring. The rest are slaughtered away from the main house at winter's approach, their meat brought in and turned into food that can last the long, cold months. This is the hard work of creating a storage room, a task the lady of this house knows well. This morning, she came down here, this very place where food supplies are truly kept. Salted pork is the staple year-round, even at wealthy tables. Fresh meat is a product of the warm months and hunting. but for the long, cold half of the year. A family mainly lives off the food packed away in autumn. Meat is wrapped in layers of salt and packed tightly in barrels or soaked in brine to exclude air and sealed, to be taken out piece by piece over the months ahead. It is a plain, hard, and smelly task, but overseeing every step does not diminish her status, because if the process goes wrong, if the salt is too little or the seal is poor, by midwinter the whole barrel will spoil and there will be nothing to replace it. That loss is one a family cannot afford. I want to linger on this point because from where we stand today, it can be easily overlooked. For us, winter is just a season of bad weather. For the people in this house, winter is something to survive. You need what you have wisely and carefully stored ahead of its arrival to make it through. The barrels filling this room are not wealth in the way we define it. They are simpler and more serious. They mark the distance between an easy winter and a hungry one, between a household greeting, spring cheerfully or in despair, and keeping that distance, making sure supplies remain enough and intact, falls largely to the woman now walking these cold rooms with sharp eyes. It is a heavy burden she bears daily, yet she carries it so lightly that you almost don't sense its weight. Of all the items stored here, nothing receives closer attention than salt itself. Without salt, almost nothing else would be possible. The value of salt is hard for those of us who can take it for granted at every table to grasp. It is not made just anywhere. It comes from the sea or from certain springs and mines, transported great distances and sold at high prices. In the centuries to come, taxes on salt would become one of the most hated burdens in all of France. A household uses it as sparingly as counting money, because in the truest sense, it is money more than money. It is the only thing that can turn a pile of meat that would rot in a week into supplies to feed a haul through to spring. Alice knows exactly how much salt the house has and how much autumn's work will demand. She will not let it run out any more than she would let the fire go out. There is another stored food almost as important as meat, though its value is not just about hunger. The church sets many fasting days every year when meat is forbidden. Every Friday, the long fast before Easter, the Advent season before Christmas, and some scattered days besides. On all these days, the whole family eats no meat, and so something else must be prepared as a substitute. Usually, fish. Fresh fish is hard to come by this far from the sea, so all the fish stocked in the storage room is salted and air-dried, barrels of herring soaked in salt, and stockfish, stiff dried cod, called woodfish. These fish are as hard as boards until soaked again to soften before cooking. It is plain fare, and there is a lot of it, because all those fast days add up to a significant chunk of the year. Alice must be sure there is enough fish to last each fast day ahead, just as she watches over the salt and the meat. For if the fish runs out, it means not only going hungry, but being unprepared before the church calendar. Besides curing meat and fish, there is cheese making, another quiet craft done in the warmer months and stored here to age. Milk cannot be kept long. Cheese allows milk to last for months. This household curdles the milk of cows and sheep with rennet, cuts the soft curds, presses them in moulds to expel water, salts them, and sets them on these shelves to harden and mature in the cool environment. The huge pale rounds you see are summer milk saved for winter, the same trick as with salted meat, but gentler, using knowledge and care to turn something perishable in days into something that lasts 6 months. Families who do this well eat cheese all winter. Those who do not feel the absence keenly. Grain is another cornerstone of the storage room. There are large amounts of grain recently harvested, threshed, bagged, and kept away from damp floors. This house's bread, the true staple at every table, no matter the status, is made from this grain. But it is not made into bread here. The grain must be taken away to be ground, carried to mills where huge stones powered by water or wind crush it into flour. The Lord takes his usual share for this service. What this household makes down here and nearby rooms is their drink. Drinking water is not always safe or reliable, so day after day, the family drinks malt beer brewed from their own sprouted grain, and in this region, people also drink strong cider made from autumn apples. Brewing is the work of women, like many other things. The wooden barrels holding the beer and cider stand in the coolness among the rest of the winter stores, providing drinks for every meal, from the Lord's table to the humblest bench. It is not just meat, grain, and drink. The garden and orchard also contribute their harvests, stored here in dozens of small forms. Apples are set on shelves in a cool attic, kept from rotting by never letting any touch each other, and they last for months. There are jars of honey, the sweetener of the time, rare and expensive, then unlike cheap sugar that would one day flood the world. Dried beans and peas for thick winter soups, baskets of nuts, strings of onions, and bundles of herbs hanging to dry also fill the room. Separate, small, and carefully guarded are the spices, pepper, and a few others this household could obtain. They come by long merchant routes, crossing half the known world, and are worth a small fortune by weight. A pinch of spice can elevate a holiday dish far beyond everyday plain fare. The lady herself measures and watches over them as she must, the most valuable things in any storage room. Some of those hanging herbs are not for cooking but for healing. In a world with scarce doctors, caring for the sick usually falls to the women of the household, primarily the lady. She tends her dried plants and simple medicines with the same care as the spices. Through her mother's teaching and a lifetime's experience, she knows which leaves cure coughs, which soaked roots ease headaches, what soothes winter fevers, and what to apply to small wounds. This knowledge does not come from books, but is quietly passed down, helping a family stand firm through months when illness is common. This makes the lady, besides all her other roles, the closest thing this house has to a doctor. Then come issues of lighting and washing, and here you see that almost nothing goes to waste. The same autumn slaughter that fills the meat barrels also provides fat, rendered down for use. Some of it becomes candles, crude ones made by dipping wicks again and again in warm beef fat until thick enough to burn. Pure beeswax candles are expensive, saved for a private chapel or important occasions. The household's daily lighting is with these softer, smokier, more homey candles. The simplest are rush wicks stripped and soaked in fat, with one end lit a cheap, fast-burning, dim light, but light nonetheless. The fat is also used to make soap, boiled with ash from the fireplace, into a rough but strong product for heavy washing. Soap was not casually used then. A clever household made their own and did not buy it. Taking a moment to step back, there is something almost beautiful about how little is wasted. The animals slaughtered at St. Martin's provide salted meat, fat for candles and soap, hides for tanning, and even bones and scraps go in the pot or feed the dogs. Nothing is waste, because nothing can afford to be. A family so far from shops survives by making the most of everything, turning a season of hard work into a whole winter of warmth, food, and light. We have grown so used to throwing things away that it is hard to imagine a life run the other way, where a thing's value is measured by how fully it is used, and a thrifty, skilled housewife is admired more than nearly anyone else. All of this is not carried by the women alone. It is worth noting how the work is shared. The heavier outdoor labour, the livestock, the fields, and all the tasks in them fall to the steward and the men. In this house that is a steady greying man named Garlon, who for years has kept the Lord's affairs in order. He handles the slaughter, transport, and the men's daily work. This morning he came down to the storage room to report to the lady how many beasts were killed, how much grain was harvested, and what autumn left to live on. The boundary between his duties and hers is not a wall that cannot be crossed. Above all this, the indoor stores, the women's work, and the good overall order of the household Alice keeps watch. She listens to Garlon's reports, asks her questions, and together they plan how to survive winter, the steward and the lady, each confident in their part and trusting the others. Standing in this cold and well-stocked room, I cannot help but think of another scene. A few miles from a house like this, there might be a convent, a home for nuns, where the same work is done by women in exactly the same way. The abbess ruling such a convent holds a rank not very different from the lady of a castle, the head of a large household, keeping it running day to day. Under her is a nun called the cellarer, whose entire job is this: storing and distributing, buying and reckoning, grain, fish, salt, and every other provision. Traft. It is considered a hard and important position, entrusted only to careful and level-headed women. A convent is like an estate. Good or bad living depends on how well supplies are kept. So, whether in a great hall or within convent walls, the heavy responsibility of keeping a family through the lean times of a year is women's work and women's skill. It is no small matter, and it is never done for good. Alice finally finishes her round. She checks the barrels, counts the cheese wheels, listens to Garlon's accounts, and offers her own thoughts. She stands for a moment in the cold silence of the storage room, surrounded by the strong smell of salt and smoke, the thin grey light falling from a small high window. The calculations this year are good or good enough. The supplies are enough and intact, and within the labour of a careful household, they have prepared for winter's worst. She tightens her shawl a little and turns toward the stairs and the warmth above. Behind her, the storage room returns to its patient, cold darkness, full all the way to the beams, ready to see a family through the long, barren months ahead, as they live quietly day by day on the wisdom left by the autumn just past. Around midday, the great hall began to change. It had been half empty all morning, a wide and chilly room with the fire burning for no one in particular, while the household's work scattered across its corners. When the light outside rose to its low autumn peak, a horn or a bell sounded somewhere in the courtyard, and people started gathering from all corners of the estate. This was their main meal of the day, taken close to noon, with the entire family coming together under one roof. It was a sight unlike any other time of day in that long hall. Standing back against a wall for a moment, one could watch them coming in. They arrived from the cold with the odours of their labours on them, men from the stables carrying the smell of horses and straw, women from the dairy and bakery, boys running errands for the household, and the Lord's own attendants. They stamped the cold from their boots at the door and found their places on the benches. The room, so quiet all morning, now filled with the low, steady bustle of many people gathered in one space. The scuff of benches, a ripple of talk, the sound of dogs being lifted down from laps. The central hearth, which had been kept low during the quiet hours, was rekindled for the meal, smoke climbing to the high roof before dispersing through the skylights, and warmth spreading through the gathered crowd. Before anyone ate, There was a strict routine to follow, observed every day. Water came first, since hands were the main tools at any medieval table, and washing before eating was natural. A servant brought a water jug, a wide basin, and a cloth, gently pouring a thin stream of water over the fingers of the guests at the main table, then the others in turn. Each dried their hands and prepared to begin. Then the hall fell silent as Father Etienne, the household priest, stood to say the grace before the meal in a few low Latin words, thanking God for the food they were about to enjoy. Everyone bowed their heads. Only after he sat down did the meal truly start. The restrained, quiet, giving way to the everyday low murmur of people sitting down to eat. Where each person sat was no accident. If you looked closely, the household's entire social order was laid out in the seating. At the upper end of the hall, on the raised platform they called the dais, stood the high table, placed across the room from the others. This was where the Lord and Lady sat, slightly elevated to overlook the whole space. The Lord of the house was named René, and the Lady, as we know, was Alice. They sat together in the centre of the high table with important guests nearby. Below the dais, extending deep into the hall, were the long tables for everyone else. Higher status sat closer to the upper end, lower status toward the lower end, each in a place fitting their rank in the household. No one needed to be told where to go, they always knew. On that high table, one small object marked this divide more clearly than anything else, something whose value we already appreciate. Salt. A giant freestanding salt container, usually crafted from fine metal and the household's finest vessel, stood on the main table. Its position served as a dividing line between the upper and lower sections of the hall. Those sitting above the salt, nearer the Lord, were the important people. Those below it, less so. The family's entire hierarchy, the strict ladder of who mattered and how much, was clearly reflected by one's seat relative to this precious salt dish. It might seem like a harsh way to arrange a dining table, and in some ways that's true, but it also reflected the world each person understood. A place defined by rank and status, and with it a certain security. Everyone in the hall knew exactly where they belonged, and that certainty was its own quiet comfort. Now for the food itself, which seems plain and simple by our standards, but was quite plentiful by theirs. It was based on bread, just as bread was the foundation of most of their meals. Most of the bread on the table wasn't just for eating, but also used to hold food. Thick slices of coarse bread, often a day or two old and hardened, served as plates. They called such slices trencher bread, placing meat and rich stew on top to eat from. After the meal, those trenchers soaked with gravy could be eaten too, or, more commonly, in large families, gathered to be handed out to the poor at the door. There was also salted pork, the staple we saw in the storeroom, boiled tender or stewed and served on shared platters. Thick soups, made from grains, beans, and whatever vegetables grew in the garden, brewed slowly in large cauldrons. Cheese, fresh and aged bread, and malt beer poured along the long tables to everyone. These were solid, filling, unchanging foods, enough to satisfy hunger in a lean season. Everyone dined together in the hall, though they did not all eat the same things. Dishes sent to the main table were often of better quality, prepared with more care, and perhaps sprinkled with a touch of expensive spices, overseen by Lady Alice herself. The tables below held simpler but richer and more abundant fare. Nobody saw this as unfair. It was just part of the same ordering principle that placed someone above or below the salt. It also decided, in its small way, What went on each person's trencher bread. No one at any table went hungry. Even the humblest place in the hall got enough to eat, which was far better than many poor households outside the walls. They did not eat like us, with full place settings in front of each person. Usually, two people shared a dish, called messmates, dipping into the same bowl, tearing from the same loaf, sometimes even drinking from the same cup. Being seated as someone's messmate meant becoming a partner in sharing bread and salt for that meal. There were knives, each person brought their own, and spoons for the thick soups, but no forks. Forks were still a novelty, not yet in common use. Most things were handled with knife, spoon, bread, and clean fingers. Throughout, dogs weaved beneath the tables, waiting for whatever dropped. And plenty did drop. This was no quiet, isolated meal like ours. It was noisy, intimate, and shared, with the whole family gathered side by side in one room, the estate showing its true character during that 1 hour at midday. The serving itself was a small ceremony and a school. Food came out in sequence from the kitchens, first to the main table, then downward to everyone else, carried by the household's young men. Just as girls like Constance were sent to the big family to be raised as ladies, boys from good families were sent here to become men, and part of growing up was serving the meal. Setting down a dish, pouring water without spilling, kneeling with graceful speed to wait on the Lord and his guests, none of this was menial labour to a boy. It was required learning, the first, low rungs on the long ladder to knighthood. Most importantly, carving meat was a skillful and respected job, with rules and special words for cutting different beasts. Learning to carve marked a young man as possessing a skill every gentleman should know. The meal came with its own etiquette too, taught to the young and reflected in the elders. No one could snatch food, take the best piece from a shared plate, wipe greasy hands on the cloth, talk with a full mouth, or feed the best leftovers to the dog before everyone had finished. Some little manuals put these rules into rhymes children memorized, many of which still apply to dining manners today. Though the hall was noisy, close, and shared, manners were real. A well-bred person could be known by how they handled a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. Watching these details was part of how the family measured their own refinement. If the household was lucky, music or stories accompanied the meal. At the far end of the hall, a small alcove sometimes held a minstrel who could play there. If a traveller happened to be staying at the estate, he might take up his instrument at the table, or afterward to sing, or tell long romantic tales of knights, noble ladies, and far-away adventures stories carried across the land from one hall to another. The room fell silent to listen. In a place as routine as this every day, the traveller's song was a rare treat. A good minstrel was welcome at any gate, earning a meal and a spot by the fire in exchange for his stories. It was halfway through a meal like this that a stranger arrived. We saw him led in from the yard, a traveller, dusty and worn from riding. Like other travellers, he came to the door asking for shelter and a meal. Houses like this were not just homes and fortresses. By long tradition, they also acted as inns, sitting many miles from any other refuge, with nowhere else for passers-by to go. Hosting visitors of all ranks was part of what these houses did. No one was surprised by him. They made room on the benches, found him a place, and set food before him so he could eat his fill before any questions were asked. Only after he had eaten did the talk turn to where he came from and what he had seen. A traveller was more than a mouth to feed. He was news. In a household settled in tranquil wilderness, where news from the outside world was slow and rare, a fresh stranger brought any gossip gathered on the road. How the next valley's harvest was, what others said about the neighbouring lord, rumours of the king and his deeds, and prices at the last market town. The family gathered close to listen. During his stay, he was a window open to everything outside the walls, and his hospitality was, in part, paid for with simple news. There was something worth slowing down to appreciate in all this. This hospitality was more than kindness, though it certainly was that. Offering shelter and food to a traveller was considered a family responsibility, almost sacred, a mission entrusted by God himself. Stories warned that God might send a guest in any humble form to test a household's generosity. Turning a traveller away was almost a sin. Taking him in, feeding him, and asking nothing in return was nearly a grace. So in welcoming this weary stranger, it was not just good manners at play. It was a whole world view, believing that open doors and shared bread were among the finest things one person could give another, and judging the household by how freely they gave those things. Throughout all this, the lady of the house kept the meal's order quietly. Though the lord owned the land and led his men, at the table and in much of the household life, the lady represented them both in a way. She stood as her husband's figure, sharing his standing by his side and taking his place when he was absent. Alice sat at the centre of the high table, seeming to do nothing while ensuring everything ran smoothly. She noticed guests being well served. She caught a dish headed to a lower table. With a word, she corrected a servant's oversight. Her hands stayed still and her face calm, making the hall work better simply by being there like a room, made more comfortable by the presence of someone who knows it well and misses no detail. The meal did not last long. With work waiting in the afternoon, these were not idle folk. Once they were full, they rose in groups, the hall emptied, and people returned to the cold and their daytime labour. Benches were pushed back and cleared, dogs were let out. Leftovers were gathered, trenchers given to the poor at the door, and dishes taken away to be washed. Alice rose last, casting one more glance at the emptying room to make sure all was right. The fire was turned low for the afternoon hours. The hall, once so crowded and loud, gradually settled back to the long autumn quiet, holding on to the meal's warmth and scent a little while longer in its rushes and soot-darkened beams, slowly returning to its usual state. This kind of afternoon in a household belongs more to its women than to any other time of the day. The men, watched closely by the steward, are outside doing heavy work on the land, tending to livestock, fields, and transportation, but inside the walls, in the dairy room, bakery, laundry room, and private chambers, a world entirely run by women is at work during these brief, dim hours. At the heart of this world, holding everything together with quiet yet watchful hands, is the lady of the house. We will spend this part of the day with her, following her steps to see the work that truly belongs to her, not spinning silk, not stockpiling, but managing all the busy women in the house and keeping them well organized. They are numerous. A large household is like a small kingdom made up of people, with a considerable portion being women, milkmaids and washerwomen, the women of the bakery and poultry yard, spinners and seamstresses, well-bred young ladies learning etiquette, and the older women who have devoted their lives to the Lord and know the house better than anyone. Each of them has a task to do, and the responsibility for assigning work, arranging each woman's efforts, and overseeing that the tasks are done well, falls on Alice's shoulders. This is not a flashy job, but it is the thread that holds the entire afternoon together. Without it, the house would soon slip into idleness or chaos, luxuries that no large household can afford. Follow her as she walks around, and you start to understand just how much there is to do. There is the dairy room, cool and clean, filled with the scent of milk, where butter is being made, and where the cheese we saw in the storehouse was originally produced. The women there have been stirring since morning, and the lady of the house steps inside to check the butter churned today. Then there is the bakery, which is the opposite of cool. It is warm and busy, baking bread, not in small batches, but by the dozens. The oven is first heated by fire until the bricks are hot, then the embers are raked out so that this large-scale household can bake enough bread in a single go to last for several days. There is the laundry room, where heavy linen fabrics are boiled, pounded, wrung, and hung to dry. It is a tough, wet, steaming job, done rarely, but always in large loads. The poultry yard shelters the hens and geese, which need feeding, watering, and locking up safely every evening to keep foxes out, and collecting eggs. Each of these tasks is a craft mastered by a woman, and the lady moves among them, inspecting, asking questions, approving, and correcting. First, step into the dairy room, the coolest and cleanest room where milk easily sours if one is not careful. The dairy is scrubbed and scalded to near spotless perfection. Here, the milk of cows and ewes is placed in wide, shallow pans to let the cream rise. Then the cream is skimmed off and churned steadily until it turns to butter. The butter is processed, salted, and shaped into rounds. Some are served immediately, others salted more heavily for storage. The milk that does not become butter is turned into cheese. This requires patience and exacting skill, and a good dairymaid is highly valued for it. The lady comes in to inspect the day's butter and finds it has turned out well. The bakery deserves a close look, as bread forms the foundation for all other food. The baking here is done not loaf by loaf, but in large batches. Heating such a big oven takes a lot of effort and would be wasted if only a small amount of bread were baked. Wood fires are stoked inside the brick oven until the bricks glow hot. Then the embers are raked out and the base swept clean so that the long wooden shovel can put the risen dough inside. The natural heat of the bricks bakes dozens of loaves at once. Not all bread is equal, though. Fine white bread made from the most carefully sifted flour is sent to the main table, while coarser, darker, heavier loaves made from flour with more bran feed the lower-ranking people in the hall and the servants. Just as at the dining table, the kind of bread a person eats here shows their status. Heavy laundering is another matter entirely. It is too big a job to do often, and is always done in large loads. Bed linens, undergarments, and linens are gathered to soak and boil in lye water, a powerful cleanser created by dripping water slowly through wood ashes, then beaten, washed, and wrung out by strong arms. In the warm seasons, they are spread white as snow on the grass or in hedgerows to bleach and dry in the sun. It is a wet, exhausting, steaming task, turning the whole house upside down when laundry day comes. But in those times, clean linen was treasured far beyond its plain appearance. Having a good stock of well-kept clean linen was a quiet sign of a household's careful management. Outside in the yard, there are small animals mainly cared for by women, laying hens, geese, and ducks. All the poultry must be fed and watered, and safely locked up every evening to protect them from foxes. Geese provide more than just meat. Their feathers and soft down are stuffed into pillows and the better beds around the house, helping keep out the cold. Somewhere on an estate this size, you will find a dovecote, a tall tower filled with pigeon nests, because the right to keep pigeons is a privilege of the Lord. It was a useful privilege. In the deep winter months, when almost no fresh food was available, these birds could supply fresh meat and eggs. All these small lives, growing feathers, being fed, producing, take place quietly under the watchful eyes of the lady of the house. Here is a point worth pausing to appreciate, as it can be easily missed. Managing a household of this size is a real and difficult skill, as demanding and serious as any man's skill in weaponry or land management, yet largely unknown because it leaves no battles behind and rarely any records. Consider how exacting it is. You have to know every task in the many-faced household and how it should be done. Decide how much of each supply is needed and when. Send the right women to the right jobs. Settle small disputes bound to occur when many people live closely together. Be firm enough to keep order, but kind enough to keep loyalty. And day after day, year after year, hold all this in your head effortlessly. Ancient chronicles tell us that to be a lady of a castle required extraordinary ability and tact. Standing here, seeing Alice move from the dairy to the bakery to the chambers, you understand what they meant. Her control is silent, but absolutely authoritative. Most important is keeping order among people, which is the hardest part and places the greatest demands on her. Women living and working together in a crowded house through a long, closed-in winter will inevitably create friction, competition, and bad mornings. The burden of keeping peace falls to the lady, who must know when harsh words are needed, when gentle ones are best, when to take things seriously, and when to let matters be. She has to maintain discipline without coldness, and command without losing hearts. It is a delicate balance to keep. The women obey her not just because she is their lady, but because over many years she has earned their obedience. They know she is fair, capable, and steady, and a household gives such a lady loyalty no position alone could buy. Watching her calm a quarrel with a single word, or soothe a scared girl with just a look, is to witness excellent rule that is no less impressive than any lords on their level. In warmer rooms, the maids continue their work, much of it endless cloth work, no longer spinning silk, but cutting, sewing, and most importantly, mending. The rate at which clothes and linens wear out is as steady as the rate at which they are made, and keeping them in good shape is never-ending labour. Simple mending patches worn fabrics, turns hems, and re-rolls edges work any pair of hands can do by the fireside. There is also fine work, left to those skilled enough. We see young girls beginning to learn embroidery, slowly and colourfully stitching, to create a fine robe, an altar cloth, or a tapestry. Amid all this practical work, embroidery is the only place a woman makes something just for beauty. Needles glide quietly. Women speak softly and easily as they work, and the afternoon settles into a half-silent, busy harmony that fills most of the winter day. Among the women and their work, there are also children. A large household always includes them. Babies still nursing, toddlers running everywhere, children of the Lord and servants, and children from other families like Constance, sent here to be raised. The youngest children are cared for by nurses and many women, who feed them, watch over them, and keep them away from fires and wells. Giving birth itself is serious because it was dangerous for women of every class, and it is the women of the house who use their knowledge and prayers passed down through generations to help each other through it. The lady of the house has a special responsibility for all this children's and women's health, and, as we see, she is the person in the house closest to a healer in a way that goes beyond being just a mother to her children. One contrast here should not be overlooked. It lies beyond the high walls. The women inside the house work hard, sheltered and well fed with bread and shelter. But the farm women in the village below Wives and daughters of the men tilling the Lord's land know this labour too, and often do even more, but without that security. Like the ladies' maidservants, they spin, weave, bake, and preserve, but they do it in one-room thatched cottages, where scarcity follows them like a shadow. Crop failures or harsh winters fall first and hardest on their heads. We do not need long explanations to honour their burdens. As we sit warmly in the ladies' private chamber, it is enough to remember one thing. The very skills that created this comfortable life behind the walls were, for most women of that age, the means simply to survive outside them. The ladies' elegance is real, but it stands on the harder labour of those who had no walls of their own. It is this awareness of the harsher world beyond the walls that gives rise to another more tender duty of the lady, her charity. A large household was expected to give alms, much of which the lady managed herself. Leftover meat from the hall and meat juice-soaked plates were given to the poor gathered outside the gates. The village sick might receive food sent out, or medicines drawn from the lady's own stores of dried herbs. Widows and orphans in trouble might receive quiet, unadvertised help from the estate. Reaching out to those in need was regarded as a Christian responsibility and part of a lady's reason for being. The best among them did this not as a grand gesture, but as a simple, steady habit woven into the household's daily workings, allowing some warmth inside the walls to spill quietly outward. The garden also needs care in the afternoon, though at this time of year it calls more for winter preparation than tending. In warm months, gardening is both a daily pleasure and duty, with herbs, flowers, and kitchen plants needing watering, weeding, and care. Tending flowers was one of few elegant pastimes for ladies, and gardens were among the rare places where beauty and practicality grew side by side. Now, late in the year, the work is different. The last hardy herbs are harvested and brought inside to dry. Flower beds are cleared, soil turned to guard against frost. Whatever can be dug up for storage is dug up. The rest is left to sleep under the cold until spring returns. The lady walks along the bare beds, noting which plants thrived and which struggled, already thinking ahead with the practical mind of a steward to the next season. Next is the distilling room, the lady's private domain, where fruits from the garden and orchard are transformed into preserves and medicines that can be stored long-term. Here, jams are cooked alongside precious honey. Fruits are dried and herbs distilled into sweet waters and simple tinctures, and medicines are prepared to treat coughs and fevers that winter will bring. Half kitchen, half apothecary, this quiet transformation of the garden's bounty into healing and sweetness was seen as a fitting and even elegant labour for a lady. Much of the goods stored below began their first processing here, under the skilled hands of the lady herself. Throughout the afternoon's flow, the passing of the day is quietly marked by bell tolls. We have already heard the small chapel's hour chimes, and now, in the afternoon, the bell for the 9th hour rings through the yard, signalling that daylight has tipped past its midpoint and is slowly leaning toward evening. Father Etienne, the household's chaplain, crosses the courtyard on an errand of his own, the bell tolling behind him. Work across the house pauses briefly with this breath, then resumes again. The church hours cast a calm, unhurried rhythm over everything during the workday, sounding a reminder that time moves on and that the day contains a larger shape beyond the tasks at hand. When the light finally begins to dim, the afternoon's work nears its end. The butter is made, bread is baked, and mended clothes are folded and put away. The women start to set aside their tasks and turn their thoughts to evening. Hens are locked in their coops, washed clothes brought in, and fires stoked higher to ward off the coming cold of night. Alice quietly finishes her rounds as she began them, giving a last look over each room, here and there offering a word or two, relying on habits honed over time to make sure all is well. In another afternoon out of many that make up this household's life, she has arranged work, overseen its progress, and kept the peace. None of it will be recorded or remembered. All the warmth, order, and quiet good running the house shows on this afternoon and every afternoon are thanks to her and her servants. As the household steps into evening, it feels steadier and more secure, just as a well cared for and lovingly tended house should. At this time, the light faded early and left quickly. One moment, the dull afternoon still barely held on above the yard, thin and cold, and the next moment, the darkness seemed to gather in the corners and climb up the walls, with the day drawing itself inward. In that last trace of ghostly blue light, the small chapel bell rang again, slow and clear, cutting through the cooling air. It was the bell for evening prayer, marking the hour of dusk. It announced to everyone in the house what their tired bodies already knew well. The day's work was done, and now it was time to retreat from the cold and dark, heading indoors toward warmth and light. They came in slowly. From the yard and outbuildings, from the last tasks of the day, the household members returned to the hall one by one. There, the fire was rekindled for the night, burning bright and tall in the central hearth. At this moment, everyone relaxed, and you could almost see them shedding the weight of their daily labor. Cold hands reached toward the firelight, stiff shoulders eased. The hall, which had felt all businesslike at midday, now showed a softer side. It was no longer lit by the faint daylight outside, but by flickering golden flames. In the shadowy corners, darkness gathered closely and kindly. Dinner was quieter and simpler than the midday feast. The time for big meals was past, and supper was a more casual, easy affair. Perhaps bread and cheese, a warming of the leftover thick soup, a cup of malt beer, eaten by firelight without the noon bustle. People sat at the table longer than needed just to eat. No one was in a hurry now. There was nowhere else to go and nothing urgent to do. Conversation was low and easy. If travellers still stayed in the house, people might coax them to tell their stories or sing a song. If there was a minstrel, the flickering firelight was his stage. If neither was there, the household made their own quiet company, like people living under one roof, working together all day and ready to do so again tomorrow. There were other ways to pass the time by firelight before bed, gentle and unhurried entertainments for those who saw the night as one of the few times to shed work. Of course, there was chatting. A family at rest would talk slowly and easily. There were old stories told over and over, riddles posed to the young. The better off could play refined games, slow and thoughtful chess on a carved board considered suitable for lords and ladies. There was also backgammon and dice games with small or no stakes. And there were always stories, long tales of knights, quests, and loyal love, known by everyone and never tiring, told loudly or sung by a gifted voice as the fire dimmed. Filling the dark hall with faraway worlds, nothing was rushed, nothing was loud. It was simply the day's gentle, companionable close, the kind of night that asks nothing of anyone but to sit, stay warm, and let the darkness come. In this firelit hall, take a moment to think about darkness itself. In their lives, darkness meant so much more than it does for us. We have forgotten what night really is. We flip a switch and turn the night into a second day. Darkness waits politely outside our windows and never bothers us. But for the people in this hall, night was a very different thing. The light after sunset was precious and rare. The hearth provided warmth and broad, soft light, and saved a few candles and rushlights for moving around the rooms. Yet a large household after dark was mostly deep shadows and small islands of light. In places the fire did not reach, cold and dark pressed close. In such a world, people did not stay up late, not because anyone forbade it, but because there simply was not enough light to do so. They had good reason to save the little light they had. There is something here worth envying even now. These people slept long, and according to the seasons, they woke in the dark winter morning and lay down soon after dark in the evening. Their waking hours were shaped by the sun and candle costs, not by any clock. The night was for sleeping, and in a long winter night like this, they gave themselves fully to it. At the end of a day like that, lying by the fire, keeping out the cold, with the work done and nothing left to do but rest, you begin to feel how natural and kindly that rhythm was, how gratefully a body settled into so much darkness and sleep, like water flowing downhill, or a weary creature lying down. Their sleep even had a pattern almost forgotten by us. In a world of long winter nights, people didn't always sleep straight through from dusk to dawn like we try to do. Usually, they slept twice. They fell into a first sleep soon after dark, then woke in the middle of night, spending 1 or 2 quiet hours lying warmly in the dark, tending the fire, whispering to each other, or simply resting. Then they fell into a second sleep until morning. That awake time at midnight was no trouble to them, not an anxious insomnia like we might have. It was a normal, even peaceful part of the night, a still pause in the heart of darkness. Just thinking about it brings calm. Such a long, unhurried night, with plenty of time to wake and then fall asleep again twice. Night was not all given over to sleep just yet. After supper, the mistress and her women would withdraw as usual to the chambers, that warm private room behind the hall. A day began there, and now it gently ended there. 1 or 2 candles were lit. The fire was fed. Within the shrinking, soft light, the last quiet moment of the day unfolded gentlest of all moments. The heavy work was over. Maybe a bit of sewing by candlelight, soothing children to sleep, women talking quietly and casually after a shared day. At some point, as on many nights, the mistress reached for the harp again and slowly began to play. The night music was different from the bright morning kind. The same simple tunes, the same unhurried notes falling, now softened, played low, not to entertain, but to soothe. The sound filled the warm room, helping it relax into rest. Constance, who had struggled with her crooked stitching all morning, sat quietly by the hearth, her eyes growing heavy. Malotte, whose hands had been busy all day, finally rested them calmly in her lap. Next. Notes passed one by one into the candlelight, then vanished into the dark beyond it. No one spoke, and no one needed to. The day ended here. A few people, a small fire, some music, a long cold night, held safely outside by the thin, warm walls of this room for just a little while longer. From the small chapel came the final bell of the day. It was the bell for the end of daytime prayers, the last hour now. It called for rest before sleep as night fell, asking for a peaceful night, calm rest, and protection during the dark hours. This was the gentlest moment of the day, made for just this time. Work done, bodies tired, night ahead. Father Etienne intoned prayers in the chapel or hall. People throughout the house stopped their tasks, crossed themselves, and turned their thoughts, brief as they might be, to the plea, Bless us through the long night, help us wake in the morning. The prayers ended, and by long, gentle custom, the day was officially given over to rest. Now the rooms slowly slipped into dreams. People left the hearth, heading to the small rooms outside the hall and around the courtyard, simple, crowded places where the household would lie down at night. Some slept in proper beds, more on wall bunks or straw mats on the floor. Everyone was wrapped in their own coverings, curling up close to fend off the cold. The house's whispers thinned and softened, slowly growing still. A door closed. A sleeping child was laid down. The last few by the hearth banked the fire for the night, raking the glowing coals together and covering them with a soft grey ash, so the warmth and beating heart of the fire could be kept safe and hidden until morning's dark called them back. This was the last task of the day, done as carefully as the first. The fire was the house's life, never to be fully extinguished, and neither could the hope of life. This great family shut themselves in for the night. The big front door was bolted, heavy doors locked fast. The estate, open to travellers, tenants, and comings and goings during the day, now folded up and closed against the dark, becoming once again a fortress as it was meant to be. There was a deep and simple comfort in this closure. The heavy bolts dropped, locking the cold and vast night outside. Inside the walls, all was warm, familiar, and safe. Outside, dark countryside, frosts forming on empty fields, and the long, lonely winter night. To lie down to sleep in such a well-closed, well-guarded house was to lie down in safety, protected by walls, and sleep more deeply for it. In the mistress's own room stood the best bed in the house, made both for comfort and to fight the cold. It was a huge wooden frame with a thick feather mattress, piled high with woolen blankets and furs. Heavy curtains hung all around the bed, able to be drawn tightly from every side to close the bed into its own warm little room in the large cold chamber, locking in the body's warmth all night. Drawing the curtains, covering with furs, sleeping warmly, this comfort was rare among those below the lord's rank. Yet even here, in the best bed of a well-to-do household, the main way to pass a night was to crawl deep into the bedclothes and wait for morning. In those days, people did not mind sharing a bed. It was for warmth, and on cold nights, a shared bed became warmer and kinder through that sharing. The mistress was the last to stay awake. It was her responsibility to see the house safely into sleep, to check that the fire was banked and would not spread, safety being the most important thing at any time. To check that doors were locked tight against cold and night, that all the little souls under the roof were settled for rest. She moved quietly through the now still house with a candle, the small flame tilting and steadying with her steps, casting her tall, gentle shadow on the stone. Behind her, every room she left slipped again into darkness. In her last round, there was a deep calm, the calm of things well finished. This long day, waking the fire before dawn, spinning wool, planning for winter, filling and emptying the hall, keeping the family working and at peace, all was done well. And now, the day was just let go, with nothing left to do. In the depth of night, the cold would show its power. The fire under the ash would weaken. The warmth in the rooms would slowly thin. Sleepers would pull their covers tighter without fully waking, curling close to keep out cold and dark. But this would be hours away, not something to fear. It was just the way winter nights were, cold and warmth holding their ancient slow balance as the house slept. Morning would come, and the fire would need waking again. The gentle cycle of the day would begin anew. But that was morning's business, and morning would not come until after a long, dark, and quiet stretch of night. The silent house slept around her, warm, dark, still, breathing the slow breath of many resting people. The fire glowed faintly beneath the ash. Cold waited outside the walls, as it always did, stopped by the warmth kept carefully by one caring household, just as it had been kept out all day. She stood a while in the quiet, with her small flame, the last light burning in this sleeping house. With practiced calm, she gently put it out. Darkness flowed in softly. The estate, the mistress, and their whole quiet world settled down, sinking into a long and peaceful night. The work of this day has come to an end, and the house has fallen asleep. We stay with a woman, from the cold before dawn until the last faint flicker of firelight at night, watching her wake the hearth, draw out silk and spin thread, plan the stores for winter, tend the hall, manage a house full of people, and finally, at the end, put it all down gently. None of this is grand or monumental. No battles were fought here, nor did anyone achieve feats worthy of record. It is just in this house, on a simple day of labour, that hands like hers quietly hold a whole world together. When we leave them to the quiet night, what is worth remembering is how many such women there were, and how little we really know about them. History preserves the names of kings and knights, while these protectors of the home have vanished almost namelessly. In a cold and difficult age, it was largely their work that made life warm, orderly, and lived with simple care. Year after year, they spent their whole lives doing these things, leaving no records except the lives they sheltered. Thinking of them, the many quiet, capable women who kept their little worlds warm against the dark, brings a kind of comforting strength. Now, you can let that world go, allowing yourself to rest just like that house does. The cold, the candlelight, and the spinning wheel belong to the past. Tonight, the warmth around you wraps you up, and this night is yours to sink into, with nothing left for you to worry or protect. If something from this peaceful day lingers in your heart, some small detail, a feeling, a moment that made you feel close, then you are warmly invited to leave a comment below and share it anytime. It is always a gentle joy to know where in the world these stories are being heard, and which corner of the past you want to wander through next. This channel exists for that very reason, to tell the story of ordinary days, long ago, slowly and unhurriedly, meant to help you rest. Over time, we will sit by fires from other eras too, medieval times, the Tudor court, ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, and many more quiet nights. If these journeys help you fall asleep, you are sincerely welcome to follow along and grow with us through night after night. There is no rush at all. We are just very glad that you are here tonight and grateful to spend this quiet time together. But now, there is nothing left to do and nowhere you need to go. The hearth is sealed. The house is dark, warm and still. The long, peaceful night opens all around you. Your breathing slows down, letting the day's weariness drift away with the wind. Now, just rest, as gently and completely as that old house does at the end of a quiet day. Sleep well.